The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion on two important reports in Design Manager, the client status and user-defined date reports, and a few topics that directly relate to those specific reports. My name is Brad, and I'll be hosting the demonstration today. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar panel. If the question is outside of the scope of today's discussion, please email them to support@designmanager.com. And lastly, if you miss a portion of the webinar or want to review any of our past discussions, you can go to our Help Center at knowledge.designmanager.com, click on the Webinars menu, select Recorded Webinars, and you can see any of our recent past discussions. You can also go to our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc., Design Manager INC. Here you can review any of our past webinars or tutorials at your leisure. Both of the reports are very similar in Design Manager and Design Manager Professional. With that in mind, I'll be switching between the two versions as I have a few settings configured differently to provide as many examples of the usefulness of the reports as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. The client status report is intended to be optionally provided to your client so they can review the overall price of the project, how much money they've contributed and still owe in the future, and some additional status information as well can optionally be displayed. Essentially, it's a tool for you to discuss how the project is progressing on many levels. The report has no mention of your cost from your vendors or even the vendors themselves and focuses solely on information from the client's perspective, such as what proposal has an item been included upon. It'll show their check number for deposits and payments, etc. The user-defined dates report is another of Design Manager's many order tracking reports that allows you to track the status of one or both of the user-defined dates in Design Manager. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the user-defined dates, let's review how they're configured and ultimately utilized, which will allow us to explore the user-defined date report itself. Design Manager automatically tracks a whole array of dates for you, many of which are completely automatic: proposal date, order date, deposit and invoice payment check dates, etc., while others, like the receiving date or expected ship date, must be entered manually. As some companies felt the need for tracking dates outside of the ones that we provided, we created two wildcard or user-defined dates for tracking timelines that are important to your company. The user-defined dates can be identified on the Company Advanced Options window. To get there, we go to File, Company Settings, click the Advanced button, and then the General tab, and there they are. In the Professional platform, you do very similar. File, Company Information and Settings, Advanced, General, and there they are. Now, when you first purchase Design Manager, this is how the two user-defined dates are configured. We have one with the sort of generic or example label of install date, while we leave the second as user date 2, meaning that it's still unconfigured and you can input any date that you would like to at this point. If you noticed over in the Professional platform, I've actually have both of them configured. So I'm using user date 1 as install date and user date 2 as actual ship date. Once you change the label from user date 1 or user date 2 to the date you actually want to track, Design Manager will automatically reflect that change throughout the software, as we'll see very shortly. In fact, where do we see these user-defined dates? Well, as with other parts of the order tracking system, we can see these dates and access them in a very standard set of consistent areas. So for example, over in our Documents and Accounting, we can go to our Purchase Order Status window, and that we can get to by going to our particular project. Let's look at a purchase order, highlight it, and click the Status button, or I could right-click and do order status as well. And that brings us to our purchase order status window. And notice in the purchase order components grid, we have columns: expected ship, receive date, vendor invoice, etc. And here are our two user-defined dates. There's our install date, and again, we're not using the second date in Design Manager at this time. So if I wanted to put in a user date, or for example, how about our install date? I can simply highlight the component, click the edit button, and on my edit order status window, there's our install date, and I can go ahead and put in a date of June 20th for our example. Over in the professional platform, very similar. Here we go to our project tab, documents frame, click on our project purchase orders. Let's put in our Hilson project, select our purchase order, and here we hit the receiving status button. And again, now we have our columns for installation date and the actual ship date. We can even see one filled in. If I wanted to add a actual ship date for our side table, just click our edit button. Go ahead and say that came in on the 10th or shipped on the 10th. And there, I'm entering in our user dates very easily. You can also use the Change All button, which is a very sort of unknown or underutilized feature where I could set a date for all of the components on the particular purchase order. So if I wanted to set a install date, for example, for all of the components, I hit the Change All button, put in some future installation date, and there they are. Very easy. Another area to enter or review our user-defined dates is on the component window itself, on the Order Status tab. So if we go over and look at our project and specifications, let's go down to the Hilson's project. Go ahead and edit our California King bed. On the component window, Order Status tab, there are our user dates right there. And there's our install date that we just entered. And the exact same over in the professional platform. Back on our specifications, pop in our Hilson project. Order status. And there's our install dates and actual ship dates here as well. So they can be entered, reviewed also. A third and final area where you can access or input the user-defined dates is when you actually input vendor invoices for purchase orders on the vendor invoice distribution window. Often the individuals entering the bills from vendors are informed of shipping dates or what has been received, etc. So having some of these fields available to input this information if desired is pretty convenient. And that is accessed in Professional under Accounting, our bills and invoices in our accounts payable frame. Click the Add button. Let's imagine we had an invoice for a project purchase order coming in. We'll use our Hilson PO again. And we can see if we click on the Edit button to get to the vendor invoice distribution window, we can see we have access to our receiving, expected ship, and there's our user dates 1 and 2 of installation and actual ship date. And for Design Manager Cloud, you would go to your Documents and Accounting, of course, Hilson Project, Purchase Orders, and very similarly, by clicking the Edit button, we can get to our vendor invoice distribution window, and there they are. So we really tried to put the user-defined dates in areas where you can access them easily and logically as you're entering in information about a particular order. Now, I sort of breezed through a lot of those concepts about order tracking in general. So if you want to see a full discussion of order tracking information and related topics, be sure to check out our webinar, Project Management Course 3, order tracking at our YouTube channel, and you can review. I go into much greater detail of the order tracking process in general. Okay, so now with the discussion on how to configure user dates, user-defined dates, and inputting themselves in the software behind us, let's see how they are actually used on the report itself. So if we go to our reports, like all of our order tracking reports, under project management folder, we have a subfolder for order tracking, and we can see the user-defined date report is at the bottom of the order tracking folder. And as I've mentioned in many webinars in the past, once I find a report that I find convenient, I always like to add it to my favorites, because then I can go to my favorite reports and access it very easily. Now, the user-defined date report, by default, it's always going to show components that are already on a purchase order. In other words, components that are on an order. If there's no purchase order, there's no real way of tracking any dates, including our user-defined dates. So if you're looking for a particular component and it's not appearing on the report, be sure that you have indeed made a purchase order for it. When we go to generate the report, we often, like many Design Manager reports, we have various options and ranges that we can use to define how we want the report to be run. Ranges in Design Manager are always optional, and they're always used to only narrow the scope of the report. If I leave the ranges blank, that means, hey, show me everything. I'm only going to input information into the ranges to narrow the focus of the information that I want displayed. And what do we have? We have a range for order dates. Those would be the purchase order dates themselves, so I could run the report for a particular month or week, etc. The selected user dates. That says, well, out of our selected date, install date in this case, do I want to narrow that down? I want to see components that have an install date of this week or perhaps next week, so I can prepare myself for the coming installations. Project and vendor range are pretty self-explanatory. The date selection. Which of the two user-defined dates are we going to be focusing upon at one time? Either the install date, well, in this case, that's the only one configured in Design Manager, but our professional has both the install date and the actual ship date. So I want to tell Design Manager which date I'm focusing upon for this report. Some other information we can optionally show. One, we can show the contact information. It's convenient to have the contact information of the shipping designation on the report. So if I'm going through and want to let individuals know that goods are going to be shipped to them, I can have all that information right on the report itself by using the show contact info. That does, of course, make the report a little bit longer. The show status. What this will do is it'll show the status of the, optionally show the status of the component on the report itself. That information we can see on the component window, order status tab, right by our user-defined dates, we have our status or storage location here. And I said something as simple as installation scheduled. And I can have that optionally displayed upon the report as well by using the show status option. Again, it will make the report a little bit longer, but not much. And professional, actually, if the show status selection is turned on rather than off as the default, not only will we show the status storage location, that version of the report also shows the spec number, specification number, and plan number if you use those as well. So a little bit more information on the professional package. Another option would be the show full description. Rather than a single line of the component description, by selecting yes here, we'd see the entire description of the component. Obviously, that will make the report longer as well. Now, I purposely skipped over the show components aspect because that's one of the most important selection on the report. because we can run the user-defined date report either with the selected date, in other words, with an installation date, or without one. And they both have a very tangible value. Let's go ahead and focus on our Hilson project. And let's first run it with our install date. And there we can see, here's our California King bed that we entered in our installation date of June 20th. So now we could run the report. As I kind of alluded to before, you can see what particular items are going to be installed or what projects are going to be installed in the future, so you can really get your installation schedule realized. If we flip that around, let's run the report again for the Hilsons. We can use the without an install date. We can show our status and full description, just as a few options there. Now notice I'm seeing a much larger description for each of the components. Our status information would appear here as well. But now we don't have any install dates filled in. So now we're trying to see what components don't have an installation schedule yet. So I can be ahead of our timeline and begin to call vendors or shipping companies to see when shipping dates are available so they can be entered, and I can stay ahead of our installation schedule. I want to know why I haven't heard anything back from my vendors or shipping companies and proactively try to get that information. So both sides are running the report either with a date, in our case the install date, or without, really does provide a tangible value. User-defined date report. Essentially, there's 2 extra dates in the system that really allow to be customized to timelines that your company might want to focus upon that aren't in our natural or standard set of dates. Now let's move on to the client status report. As I said before, the client status report is intended to be shared with the client, as no sensitive information regarding the purchasing of the merchandise is included on the report. Everything displayed is truly for the client's perspective. Like the user-defined report, there is some configuration options available on the company advanced option window. So let's go back there, again, File, Company Settings, our Advanced button, and right on the Print tab, we have Status Date column selections. The client status report can optionally show some of our status information milestones, such as the order date, expected ship date, and even our user-defined dates that we just discussed. Now, if you don't want to use any or perhaps only 1 or 2 of these dates on the report, you can select none. So here on our client status report, we're only going to be showing when it was ordered and the actual ship date or expected ship date. And for our professional users, very similar. Back on our File, Company Information Settings, Advanced, and we have our client status dates right here as well. And I could change them from, let's say, ordered, let's change expected ship to actual shipped, and maybe our install date. So you really have a lot of options in there. And looking at some of those dates, well, ordered, that's, as I mentioned before, that's the purchase order date on the PO itself, automatically filled in and created when you make a purchase order. The expected ship, our user-defined dates, in this case our install and actual ship date, and our received, those are all entered on our purchase order status window, and a few of those other windows we reviewed as well. One, however, delivered, is one we did not discuss. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. In Design Manager, how do we enter a deliver date? Very easy. Let's go to our Documents in Accounting. Let's go down to one of our Carter's projects, and I can go to my proposal status window. So I'm going to select proposal 1 for our master bedroom and wine cellar and hit the status button. And on our proposal status window, notice there's a column for delivered with a checkbox. So let's say that all of our master bedroom furniture was delivered. I could come to this window and very easily just mark off all of the ones as delivered. And by clicking OK, I'm saving that designation while simultaneously, back on our project and specifications, let's look at the master bedroom. On our component for the California King bed, order status tab again, just by checking the box as delivered on the proposal status window, I'm also setting the delivered date for each of the components to today's date. Now, of course, I could change that if desired to a different date, or I could really just come to the component window order status tab and enter it in manually as well. I just find it a little bit more intuitive and user-friendly to do it from that proposal status window. Now, in Professional, however, the delivered designation is set when we make a delivery ticket. So in that platform, if we go to our Project tab, under Documents, we go to Project Delivery Tickets. And let's look at the same project for our Carters, and you can see that I've created a delivery ticket in the past. Let's reprint that. And here's the delivery ticket in the Pro Cloud platform. And this is intended to give to your delivery or shipping team as they can see the goods that they're delivering, of course, the total that was ordered from the vendors, what's being delivered today, and then the quantity shipped actually gets filled in by the shipping team. Hopefully that matches what's to be delivered, and then those quantities can get updated as well. In fact, there's even an area where whoever's receiving the goods can sign and date as well. And when a delivery ticket is created, automatically in specifications, on the item window, status tab, we can see our delivery ticket information along the bottom. Delivery ticket 1, the date, what quantity was delivered, and what quantity was indeed shipped. So that's a little bit more of an advanced system in the Professional platform, but that's how the delivered designation gets set. Okay. Now, let's focus on the client status report in Design Manager first, as it functions very similarly in both platforms, and then I'll go ahead and point out some additional features that are only available in the Pro Cloud version. By default, the client status report is going to display all items, not the components themselves, but the items. Again, client's perspective. The items are what they see on proposals and invoices, so the client status report should show the same. It's going to take those items, it's going to group them by location, room location in the project, and then as a project total itself. So let's go to our report window, project management reports, client status. And of course I would add that to my favorites so I could access it easy in the future. Now let's see what some of the options are available for us. The client status report is run on a per client basis, so you're always focusing on a singular client and one must be entered, of course. And then we have ranges to narrow the focus of the report if desired. Obviously project range, as you know, clients can have multiple projects, so we could focus on a singular project for a particular client, a location within a project, proposal range within a project, and even an invoice number range if I wanted to show the client just items on a certain invoice for their review. That's available as well. So let's take a look at the report. Let's do one for the Carters and see what information is displayed for us. And we'll just leave the other settings as the Design Manager defaults, and I'll explain them all shortly in detail. And here is our client status report. So in the header of the report, we can see the client themselves. We can see the project. The report is going to group and page break by project. So you can see at the beginning of each project, a new page will begin. The ranges are listed for us as well, just for our review. Within each project, as I said, we're going to sort and subtotal by location, so each location has its own totals. And now let's look at some of the information itself. So first we have our reference number, that's the item reference number, so the client can cross-reference it to their proposal and invoices, the quantity and unit of measure. By default, we're going to show 2 lines of description on the report. The professional version does have an option to show the full description, and that will make the report much more lengthy, of course. Proposal number and date is listed. The price, sales tax, deposit, balance, I'll talk about all of those in great length very shortly, so we'll hold off on that for a moment. And then we can see, here's our tracking columns. In our Design Manager Cloud, we're showing the order date and the expected ship date. And recall that I turned off or set the deliver date to none. That would appear in this space right here if I wanted the third date to be shown. Along with this report, you can see some information almost beneath the item information itself, such as the proposal number, the client's check number for their deposit, invoice number, client's payment check numbers would show under the amount paid, etc. Now, that provides more information to the client, but some Design Manager users feel it unnecessary, or that the additional information may visually overload the report, or just want it turned off for any other reason. Well, you can do so just by selecting Show Details to No. And now if we look at the report, we can see all that extra information is no longer being displayed, and it will somewhat shorten the report, and it does tend to simplify it visually. So that was our default format of the client status report, where we're showing each item within the project, grouped first by project, of course, and then location within a project. But we do have a few other formats available with us with the last menu selection, report format. So besides detail by location, we have detail by proposal location and summary by proposal location. Remember, we're always trying to think of our client's needs. So these additional formats might be better suited to the client, so you can experiment with them, and perhaps certain clients like one format better than the other. So we try to have additional options available for you. So let's review the detail by proposal or location. Some clients often think of their overall design project in terms of proposals, of course. So this format is going to first group all the items by project, of course, and then by proposal within the project. And then within each proposal, it'll group by the locations themselves. All of the information is the exact same as the detail by location. We're just displaying it differently. So let's take a look at that. So now we can see again our client in the header, our project. Any items not on a proposal need to go somewhere, so they go into the none area of the proposal and are going to be listed first, and then within the location. Next, we'll get to proposal 1 for the Carter's Pennington Home project, and we can see the proposal number, the date, and even the proposal name itself in the header region for us. Within each proposal, we can see the location totals, and then we can see the proposal total. And for each project, we can see the project totals as well. And again, in this format, we will also page break by proposal number as well. So every new proposal will generate a new page. Same information as the detail by location, just being displayed differently. Now sometimes the item detail itself is not necessary for an overall review with the client of pricing, status, etc. They just want to see summarized information. Well, that's where the summary by proposal location version comes in. And if we select that format, which is the last on the list, take a look. We're still grouping by project and proposal number. And again, here's our items that are not on our proposal. But rather than showing each item within the location, we're having one line per location itself. And if we look at some of our other pages, now we can see the master bedroom, all of its information, the wine cellar. So a nice, clean, concise listing of the locations and a very easy report to discuss generalities with your clients. In this case, any of the order tracking information, that would be the most recent date for any item within that location proposal combination. So whatever the most recent date is, that will be the one that's being displayed. Report formats, there they go. Detail by location, detail by proposal location, or summary by proposal location. Now recall that I said by default, all items within the project will be included on the report. That can be changed, however, depending on if you want to provide information on items in various stages of the design process. So that's controlled by the Show Items selection, and all items is the default. But we have other options in there, such as Not Completed. This is going to only show items currently active or not yet indicated as complete in the specifications. Essentially, these are items that are still progressing through the design timeline. This provides the client information on what to expect in the future financially, if there are funds are still going to be due on certain items, what items will be received and delivered in the future, and those types of things. So how does an item become set as completed? Well, for those of you who don't know, over in our project and specifications, let's take a look at our Pennington home, bedroom. Let's look at our California king bed again. And if we edit that, on the item window itself, status tab, there's an option for completed. So by checking that box, Design Manager is going to then understand that that item has successfully progressed the design process to your satisfaction. And once it's designated as complete, it'll actually appear in the completed folder beneath all the quote-unquote active items. Now this is an entirely manual system, but it does provide better management of the project as you really focus solely on items that are still actively being purchased, delivered, billed to the client, etc. And when an item has been marked complete, it also will be not shown on windows such as your new proposal window, new invoice window, new PO window by default. It keeps that list very nice and tidy for you, so you're only focusing on active items. That leads me to another quick point, the concept of completed versus inactive. Unlike completed items, items indicated as inactive, which means they never could have been included on a purchase order, a client invoice, etc., they're never going to appear in the client status or other reports for that matter, as they've been designated to be outside of the scope of the project for whatever reason. Perhaps the client's going to come back to them at a later time, etc. But once an item's been marked inactive, it's really outside of any active scope of the project, so it will not be seen on any relevant window like I just mentioned, or any report as well. Now for our professional users, however, over in our specifications, you can mark an item as complete right on the specification window just by checking the checkbox, or also on the item window itself, status tab, it can be marked as completed. And even on the specifications window, rather than having a folder as Design Manager Cloud does, you can use your show menu to look at complete items as well. Unlike in Design Manager Cloud, Professional can be configured to automatically set items as completed using the status codes. So if I change the status of our king bed to completed, for example, that automatically sets my completed designation as well. And it's this checkbox that Design Manager uses as the completed designation on that client status report, regardless of what the status name says here. And we'll change that back to delivered. For more information for our professional users on status codes, be sure to look at our webinar on status codes and the project schedule in Design Manager Professional, again on our YouTube channel at Design Manager Inc. Okay, so all of that behind us. Let's take a look at how the report changes. So if we run it for not completed items, this again would be those active items. We can then see, notice there's all of our guest bedroom, master bedroom, but we only have one entry for our time location. But our original report, we had several. Why? Because all of them except for item 19 here have been marked as complete. So we're focusing on the goods and services that are still in that real active phase. Conversely, we can run the report for items completed. So now we can sit with the client and review the progress of the design project to see what merchandise has been finalized, what services have been provided, and any funds that may still be necessary for those finished items as well. So they're really seeing what products and services have been finalized at this point. And in this case, we're going to see those time items that we've not only invoiced to the client, they've paid in full, so we've designated them as complete. And again, it could be merchandise, anything, as long as it's marked as complete, Design Manager will show it on that version of the show items selection. The last option is our in progress selection. Now this selection really allows the client to focus on items that are in the most active phases of project management, in that they have been ordered from the vendor, so the client has clearly approved the merchandise, but the final receipt, installation, and therefore invoicing of the item has not occurred, but will presumably do so in the near future. In essence, these are items that are on a purchase order but have not yet been invoiced to the client. And if we run that version, you can see all of our items are going to, of course, have an order date because that's the indication that they've been on a purchase order, but they're all designated so far as not invoiced. One note on that version of the show items, time items will never appear in that case because, well, they're never going to be on a purchase order. So this really only focuses on merchandise or other tangible services that need a purchase order to be shown on the report. Very common way of running the report, as it really is active items that are in the real throes of the design process. Now, Professional Platform actually does not have that designation. It's only the completed selections themselves, because the Pro platform has a lot of other more advanced ways of narrowing the scope of the report based upon the status of the item, which I'll get to towards the end of our discussion today. Okay, now, one of the most important settings on the client status report is the pricing calculation, as it determines what price, sales tax, deposit, etc. will be shown for each item depending on the current need of your client. So let's explore each setting in detail. Highest value, estimate, or actual. This is the default in Design Manager Cloud. What this setting will do, it's going to examine both the estimated price of the item, in other words, what's currently in the specification, versus the actual price, which is determined or calculated when the client is invoiced for the item. And it's going to take the higher of those two values. So let's take a very simple example to illustrate what I mean. Let's print for the Carters and let's narrow this down. Okay, great. A very simple example with two specific items. So we have our sleigh bed and we have some fabric. Now, we can see the price of each, sales tax, deposit, balance, etc. If we look at our specifications, though, we can see how these numbers are derived. Let's edit our sleigh bed. There we go. In this case, we can see, well, the total estimated price of the bed was $2,820, which is what we display here. And we can see the sales tax and the balance matches our pricing precisely. But if we look at our status tab, notice we did invoice this particular bed on invoice 10,004, which we can see here, but we invoiced it for $2,200 and the sales tax of $110 for a total of $2,310. So, over $600 less than what the report is showing. Conversely, if we look at item 14, we can see that the total estimated price was $396.40 with a sales tax of $1,982, but the report is showing $425 and $2,125 of sales tax. In that case, if we look at the status tab and we can see what we truly invoiced, we did indeed invoiced for $425 and a higher corresponding sales tax. So Design Manager is reviewing the price we have entered in our specifications versus what was truly invoiced and is displaying the higher of the two. Now, knowing how these values are derived really improves how to properly use the client status report to its fullest. So this also applies to the deposit. If the received deposit, which is what gets attached to the proposal, and the applied deposit, or the amount used on an invoice, are different, the higher of those two values will be shown as well. Now I have another example to display what I mean there. Back on our reports, let's run one for the Hilson here. I'll focus on a particular invoice. So here we have a dining room table. And if we look at that item in specifications, there it is. We can see we have our total estimated price, which matches perfectly. That part is fine. But if we look at our status tab, we can see some information. One, we received $1,540 as a deposit on that item, on the proposal. But notice in the invoice section, I've actually used $3,264.80, which is the higher of the two values, of course, and that is the one being displayed on the report. If we look over our documents in accounting, I can see, there is that additional $1724.80. So when the invoice was created, the user manually input more of the retainer against that invoice. So Design Manager is capturing that higher value and is using that on the report. One point as well. When the requested deposit value is never shown on the report. The deposit is always going to be either the received deposit or the deposit applied to the proposal or the applied on the invoice when it's truly used. The deposit requested would just confuse the report, make it a little bit too long, so make it a little bit unreadable, and that information can be conveyed to the client during the proposal stage. So we frequently get questions of this deposit, why isn't my requested showing there? It's never intended for that. That's always either the received or applied values. Further, the amount paid column. No matter what pricing calculation we use, and we'll go through the rest very shortly, the amount paid is always the actual payments on the invoice itself. So if there's any payments on the invoice, they'll always appear there, regardless of any estimate versus actual pricing calculations. So our highest value option, why would this be useful? Why would we want to show one price or the other? If the price to the client at invoicing was greater than originally estimated, for example, let's say the cost from the vendor increased or you had additional charges, freight, crating, etc., and they were added while invoicing, the report would then match the invoice price for greater accuracy. And as the project progresses towards completion, all of those items will eventually be invoiced. So you want to match the invoices themselves as much as possible. Conversely, if the item has currently been invoiced for a price less than estimated, the current estimated price will be shown, as we saw, in case a partial invoice was created for an item that's not received in full, and we know that additional invoicing will still be yet to come. Or let's say that freight or other charges have been estimated but not yet invoiced, etc. Doing so ensures the client sees the higher value, so there's no debate when additional invoicing occurs in the future. Essentially, this pricing model errs on the side of caution by always showing the higher value. Okay, that's the first, highest value. Next, estimate. Regardless of the status of the invoicing of the item, the estimated price, sales tax, and received deposit are always going to be displayed. So if we look back at our Carter project again, let's focus on those guest bedroom items. Here we can see that the report is always going to show our total estimated price, sales tax, and any received deposit, received, not requested. And even though we invoiced for less, we're still going to show the estimated value. Same with our fabric. We can see that the report is showing $396.40, as is our estimated value, regardless that we invoiced for the higher amount. So the estimated calculation will always show what's in the specification at the time. Same with the deposit. If we look back at our Hilson example, take a look at that. There it is. Notice here, here's our dining room table again. We're showing a deposit of $15.40. And we're using the estimate pricing calculation. We're always going to use the received amount on the report. Regardless that we invoiced for more, if we invoiced using more deposit because we applied a retainer towards it, we're always going to see the received value. So why is the estimate pricing calculation useful? Well, this is desirable if you have certain charges such as freight that are agreed upon to be invoiced to the client when you receive the bill from the vendor and maybe much later, but are never included on the proposal to the clients. So if you use the highest value calculation in this case, you're always going to have a little balance due of the freight on each item, but you really want to focus solely on the merchandise pricing. So the estimate allows you to do that. Another use is to print the report with estimated pricing calculation, and again, with another pricing model, such as actual, which we'll get to in a moment. So you can compare the two. Well, this is what we quoted, and this is what was truly charged to you. Now note, if you do use retainers frequently during invoicing, this model can be somewhat confusing, as it will not include that value in the deposit column, as we just saw in our Hilson example. So if you want to use the estimate pricing model, I would, rather than using a retainer at the time of invoicing, I would apply the retainer as a payment on that invoice. So that value would always appear here and keep the report 100% accurate. Okay. Next. So we saw highest value, we saw estimate. Now let's see the opposite, which is actual. So essentially, this is the reverse of the estimate pricing. This method is only going to show amounts truly invoiced to the client. So the price, sales tax will be the total amounts invoiced to the item at that time. The deposit will not show the received amount. It's only going to show the amount utilized on an invoice. So again, sticking to our two examples here. Now we can see, remember, our sleigh bed is at the lower or the invoiced value of $2,200, and our error root is at the 425 or the higher of the two. So we're only showing the amounts truly invoiced to the client. And the exact same with the deposit column. Oops. Let's go back to our Hilson for that. Now we can see the price, sales tax, and we can see that full application of the deposit. Even though we received $15.40, we're now showing the full $32.64.80 on the report. So we're always following what was truly invoiced to the client. Well, why is this model useful? This pricing calculation becomes extremely useful as the project or phases thereof near completion, as the final invoicing has taken place. It provides an exact detailing of what the client was charged for the goods and services, the amount of sales tax they accrued, any true accurate balances due, etc. And as I mentioned, it can be used as a reference against the estimate pricing model to denote any change that may have occurred in pricing, any credits that were applied. You could use the two reports in conjunction with one another to give a full accounting of the project at its completion. Okay, one more. Estimate if actual is 0. Now that, in fact, is the default in the professional platform versus the highest value in Design Manager Cloud. Now, this calculation is going to use the estimated values for the item until any portion of the item has been invoiced. The estimate of actual zero really adheres to the invoice is king concept, that anytime an item is invoiced, those are the values that now should start being monitored. Let's jump over to the Pro platform for an example there. Let's go back to our Hilson. Let's go back to our sleigh bed. Oops. Okay, there we go. Now, I configured this the Pro platform a little bit differently. And notice our familiar California King bed, it's only a price of $220 being shown on the report. But if we look at specifications, it's bigger. Item status. Okay, so we can see the item itself should be $6,720, but we've only currently invoiced $220 of just freight. Perhaps there's an upfront shipping charge or something like that came along. So this model is only going to show what's been invoiced so far. So even if a partial shipment came in and we invoiced a particular amount, half, for example, that's what the report is going to start monitoring. Well, that seems odd. Well, why would that could be problematic in my opinion? Well, this model is really useful, and here's why. In accrual accounting, which is the model suggested for interior designers under generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP accounting, and the one that Design Manager utilizes, the concept of the invoice is of the greatest importance. The invoice to the client signifies the transfer of ownership of the merchandise and is the process that records revenue, cost of goods sold, sales tax, alleviates deposits, etc. And as such, invoicing should be done when the client truly receives ownership of the good or service at the end of the item's design cycle. So with that in mind, once the invoice is generated, those values really are the ones you want to monitor and convey to the client at the stage in the design cycle. The invoice should be the final stage in the item's progression to the client, except of course payment due upon that item if necessary. So by following estimate of actual is zero, you're working on all of your estimated or proposed values until invoicing begins to occur. And then the report is going to show those values, as that is truly where the client, truly where the items have moved in the status and fiscal status at that point. So those are the 4 different pricing calculations, and they all have merit, and each design firm may prefer one or the other, and even your clients, of course, may prefer one or the other. Just knowing how they all affect and how they're displayed on the reports is the real key. Now, with that, let's turn our attention just a few features left on the client status report that are available in the professional platform versus Design Manager Cloud. One of which is the show items. You have another selection where you can look at items with a deposit received. Now, these are the items that are agreed upon. So basically, we propose them to the client. They've agreed implicitly and explicitly by giving us funds or a deposit against those items. So they're really going to be the ones that we want to focus upon before purchasing begins and those types of things. You could also use invoiced. I want to see only items that have been invoiced to the client. So in that case, when you're using the invoiced in conjunction with either the estimate if actual is zero or the actual, you're focusing only on items that have been invoiced, and all the values should then be truly what was on the invoice. And you also have a selection of deposit received or invoiced. This is kind of a combination of the two. So you can review items that are still progressing through purchasing, and those are the ones that have the deposit received, and they might still need to go through delivery, etc. And you're also monitoring ones that have been invoiced. So you can show the clients things that are in progress and have been invoiced to them as well. So they have both a feeling for how the project is progressing and where they are financially as well. Another option on the professional is the item status. Recall that the design manager has the show items where we have our completed designations and our in progress. Professional, we have completed, but we also have our item status selection. So I could see all of our items that are ordered, that are invoiced, that are completed, or I could see items that are delivered, for example. And now we can see just those items that we have marked as delivered as a custom item status that I have for us. Or you can, a very convenient example, you might want to use, I want to see all items that are awaiting client approval. These would be items that have been included on a proposal, but for which I have not yet received the deposit. So we can discuss with the client why we haven't gotten a deposit or those types of things. So the professional has a full item status selection, which matches, of course, to status designation on our specification window. So you can really narrow the focus down on that report to particular sets of items. And that brings us to the end of our discussion today, where we went over and reviewed two reports, the extremely important and useful client status report and a less known yet helpful report in the user-defined date report. We tried to review some of the options that you can configure in the company advanced options window that can make these reports as useful as possible for your firm. And I tried to go through each report in great detail on the information that's displayed, various manners of running the reports, and all of the options that are available. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us again today, and I hope you attend a webinar with us again in the near future.